Welcome to my channel. I'm Amy, and almost 3 decades ago, I left the United States to become a full-time missionary in Colombia. If this is your first time here, welcome. If you've been watching my videos, thank you so much, and welcome back. This channel is all about life on the mission field, life in Colombia, and all of the many lessons that I've had the privilege of learning along the way. Now, what I thought would be a temporary assignment here in Colombia, maybe 5 years, maybe 10 years, has actually become my life. And living in another culture for decades changes you in ways that you never plan, changes you in ways that you never ever expect. And so these are a few of the lessons that I've learned along the way, and these are a few of the things that no one told me before I became a missionary full-time. In first place, you will never stop being the foreigner. I have officially lived slightly longer in Colombia than in the United States. Actually, more than half of my life has been spent in Colombia serving full-time on the mission field. And you'd think by now that I would fit right in, but most days I still kind of feel like an outsider. And I can usually predict Colombian reactions. I understand Colombian humor for the most part. I understand a lot of the Colombian culture, and I know most of the unwritten social rules. And I guess for the most part, I feel at home here in some ways. But my first instinct is still American. And I think missionaries learn what I'm just going to call the bridge culture. You never fully belong to one culture or the other culture. I don't fully fit into American culture anymore, yet I don't fully fit into the Colombian culture either. I think I have like a third culture that kind of borrows from both. I'm going to take the good from both worlds and mix them together as much as I can. Another thing that no one told me is that home will never be just one place again. You're going to miss holidays and weddings and birthdays and funerals. And when you're back in your home country, you're going to miss your second home also. And I used to feel more at home in Colombia because that's where my life took place. But as I get older, I find myself missing the United States and being stateside even more. And I spend a lot of my life never completely belonging. I think that today's culture, there is an emphasis and a focus on belonging. Belonging people, a lot of people get how many views they get on a video on social media or how many likes, and it's kind of a false sense of belonging. And I have spent so much time that I never feel like I belong fully in Colombia. When I go back home, I don't fully feel like I belong in the United States. And God has shifted my focus. And I'm not sure when I accepted this just a price that I'm going to have to pay for the calling that's on my life. But I think that I've finally come to terms with not needing to completely feel like I belong in one place or the other. And I'm actually okay with that. And it hasn't been easy, or I guess I should say it isn't always easy, but I do believe that God gives a supernatural grace to be okay with it. And the more that I lean on God, the less I find myself needing a place or a country or a culture that makes me feel like I belong. Because my belonging I have found in the presence of the Lord. It's become the place where I always feel like I fully belong. Something else that no one told me is that you become an expert at saying goodbye. Goodbyes will slowly become a part of your normal life. Some people have misunderstood my calmness in the goodbyes, and they misunderstand it as a coldness or a not caring. But honestly, it has just become another area that I have had to learn how to accept and be okay with it. And one thing that I think that helps me is that I always have a rough estimate of my next visit. I remember when I first came to Colombia, I was here for probably 10 years before I went back to the United States. And I had such a reverse culture shock when I finally made it back home. And it was so difficult. I never felt like I totally belonged in Colombia, and I still feel that way. But then going back home where you should belong and feeling like you didn't, that was probably the biggest culture shock I've ever experienced in my life. And thank God for the last 6 years, I've been able to come home about every year, maybe a little more, maybe about the last 7 years. I've been able to come home almost every year. So it helps me to focus less on the leaving and I focus more on the coming back. I spend my life translating and translating and translating. I don't just translate Spanish into English or English into Spanish. I explain Colombians to Americans and I explain Americans to Colombians. But one thing people don't realize is that translating never really stops. And I'm going to try to explain this in the best way that I know how. But I am constantly interpreting. I'm interpreting conversations, customs, expectations, and I really miss the simplicity of not having to think about culture at all. I always think about culture. I would love to just simply be present without filtering everything through two different ways of seeing the world. And there are days when I wish I didn't have to think so much, honestly. I wish I could walk into a room, have a conversation, and not be mentally translating expectations, reactions, or cultural differences. And living between two worlds, it is an amazing and it's a wonderful gift. But if you're not careful, it can also be mentally exhausting. Another thing that I've realized, and another thing that no one told me about, is that you'll need a really good sense of humor. Thank God I have a good sense of humor. And I want to tell you about a time, one of my first language mistakes. And I was so marked by this or traumatized by this that I will never forget it. But I was speaking at a church conference. There were leaders and church attendees there. And I was teaching on God's love and God's mercy. And so what I wanted to say was that God isn't a God that has a bat in his hand and he's waiting for a moment for us to mess up so he can hit us over the head with his bat every time that we have a problem or every time that we don't do things correctly to punish us. Okay, in Spanish, the word bat is palo, P-A-L-O. And the word duck is pato, P-A-T-O. So I bet you can figure out where I'm going with this. Instead of saying that God is not up there with a bat waiting to punish us or waiting to hit us with his bat over the head to punish us every time we mess up, I kept saying he's up there with his duck in his hand, waiting to hit us over the head with his duck every time that we mess up so that he can punish us. Obviously, people were looking at me so strange, and I couldn't figure out why they were looking at me that way. So, no bats and no ducks. That was an embarrassing moment, and I have a lot more of those moments that I'll share in future videos. And I've had a lot of cultural misunderstandings, a lot of language mess ups for sure. But I want to wrap this up. And one of the things that I aspire to do in these videos is I don't just want to sit here talking about me and telling you about Colombia and telling you about all the good things and all the hard things that I've experienced on the mission field. But I want to share with you the lessons that I think cross borders and that I hope challenge you to seek God more. And so to finish up today, I want to talk about needing more humility than you need talent. That was something that no one ever told me. And this isn't necessarily a missionary lesson, it's more of a life lesson. And I think it's especially in ministry and in Christians. But when I was in my early 20s, I thought that talent is what God needed from me. I thought if I studied enough, if I prepared enough, if I worked hard enough, I would be useful. And now I'm in my 50s and I've learned something very, very different. Talent may open a door, but humility is what allows God to keep shaping you and using you once you step through that door. Talent may impress people for a season, but humility allows God to transform us. And the next season that we're walking into, we may even be in this season now, it's going to require humility more than talent, even more than experience. And when you've lived in another culture for decades, you learn one thing, that experience may make you more capable, but transformation is what makes us more usable. God isn't preparing us for a ministry. He's preparing us to leave a legacy that outlives ourselves. Experience will teach you what to do, but transformation is who we become. And in the end, who we become is what leaves the greatest harvest. So the goal isn't simply to finish our race, to have the talent, to have the experience to finish our race. It's to have the humility to become more like Christ along the way and to leave behind a harvest that's going to continue long, long after we're gone. So if you've stayed around this long and you've watched this video, I appreciate it so much. I hope these videos encourage you to seek God deeper in your own life, to keep your life ready for this next season, for the mission that God has over your life, wherever you are, whatever country you're in, whatever your job is, whatever your day-to-day is, that you would keep seeking Him to the deepest level. Thank you so much again for watching. I appreciate everyone that's watching, that's sharing, that's subscribing to this channel. God bless you, and I will see you next week.